Good morning. I feel like I'm kind of sitting down in a hole because this is a different situation where I'm sitting this morning, but we'll try it and see how it works. I just had a couple things on my mind. Been watching some videos recently and wanted to talk about them for just a second, but there is so many people that stay depressed or they look at the negative side of things. And that is such a sad way to live. I know that I knew a family at one time that it seems like anytime you talk to them, they were sick, they needed to go to the doctor, they had a doctor's appointment, and that's all they dwelled on was sickness. And as I've told you before, my mom and dad never did complain. And so I wasn't used to being like that, you know, complaining all the time about my toes hurting or something's hurting or I'm going to the doctor. And and I think sometimes we kind of ease into that and not realize that we are looking more on the negative side than on the positive side. Because if you think about my leg is hurt, just my leg is not hurting, but if your leg is hurting, let's just say that I don't want to use the leg because Lois will think I'm talking about her. If you just have something wrong with you, my head's hurting or my ears are hurting, we need to think instead of my ear is hurting, but I can walk around. I have a house with heat or air conditioning. I've got, everything I need. We need to look more at the positives than at the negatives. So I'm just going to throw that out there. I'm not going to give you a 20-minute speech on what you need to be thankful for. We all know what we need to be thankful for. But I had seen this little note the other day, probably on the internet, that I thought was it's just kind of cheerful to think about. And it's talking about glimmers, Glimmer, a glimmer in life. What is a glimmer in life? It's those little moments in your day that make you feel joy, happiness, peace, or gratitude. Once you train your brain to be on the lookout for glimmers, the more these tiny moments will begin to appear. So, I think let's all today start looking for some little glimmers in your life and think, what could that be? What could that be in my life? The other day when I took my husband for his treatment and we had such a rough day of waiting and being in traffic and all that, it just seems like at one point coming down the road, when the traffic started clearing out, there was just such a relief went over me that I felt happy or content from just being out of just that, kind of, I was just all stressed out of being in that traffic and what all we had been through. So, although I had a very stressful day, I found some good parts of it. And I know that night when I was putting my husband to bed and he was saying, I'm sorry that you've had such a rough day. He was sorry I had such a rough day. And I said, hey, but let's be thankful that we got through it all and that we got home safely. And that's what matters the most. Because we're all going to have problems in our lives. And if you don't have problems in your life today, I promise you, you will have. But not to try to depress you or make you look for them, but we're all going to go through things. I'm 73 years old. If I've not been through some things by now, something's bad wrong. But anyway, I'm thankful today to be here. I'm up here at my little house, and my girl's going to come up and we're going to eat lunch together, and then she co-ops part of the day from school into a business here in the county. So that's going to be a little glimmer for me to get to see her and be with her. Now, another thing, recently I've been watching some videos about young women and even some men, and I'm talking young, being in their 30s and 40s, being in the school system and quitting after just a few years of teaching. And you think, why would anybody quit? Teachers have, insurance. They've got summers off. They get off at like 2:30 or 3 in the afternoon. They've got a planning period during the day. They've got all these pluses that, just looks like the sweetest job on earth. But let me tell you, it's not. It's not at all. When you leave that school of a day, it's not going to be 2:30 if you care anything about teaching. It's going to be after that. And then when you go home, that's always on your mind. And then sometimes you get to where you even dread getting up and going to face those students. Now, there's a lot of people that love teaching, and I love teaching until the last few years when I was subbing. And in fact, when I was subbing, I knew most of these kids because I was at the school so much. And by the time they got to middle school, I had them a lot subbing in elementary school. So, I knew a lot of the kids. It wasn't like I was a stranger going into the classroom. But even to me, they kept acting worse and worse and worse. I'll never forget one day. This was one of the last days I taught. And I thought, Debbie, are you stupid or what? I don't have to do this. And I would say to those kids, I don't have to do this. And they'd say, are you rich? Is that why you don't have to do this? And I said, no, but I don't have to do this, but I do it because I love you guys and I want to teach you something and I want to enjoy the day. I like to have fun, One of the last days I taught, it was 6th grade, and we were watching a video the teacher had left. And this kid, who is known to be a troublemaker, he comes up from the back of the room and says, can I go to the restroom? And I said, this video is like 5 more minutes. Wait till it's over because the teacher wants you to watch it, and then you can go. Well, he threw his arms up in the air, and he said, what the friggin' blah, blah, blah. And I don't know. I just thought, what is happening to our world that the kids are acting like this? But we have to look again. Look at the parents. How are they being raised? Just like with my daughter, there's so many situations down through the years that, she would come in frustrated or something, and, and the first thing you think about is lashing back. You can't treat my kid like that. You can't do this. But, if you look at the grand scheme of things, some of this stuff is so useless. It's, in a week, you're not going to remember it. We need to teach our kids, our grandkids, our great-grandkids, that life, is not fair, to be nice to people, to avoid confrontations. There's so many things that we could teach them that would help everyone get along better. Now, a couple of videos I'd watched this morning about this one girl, she was in her 20s, teaching 3rd grade, and she turned in her resignation at Christmas and didn't go back. 3rd grade, she had a kid throw a chair at her, hit her, just scream out, get in her face and scream out, you can't do that, my mama says, blah, blah, blah. And she just seemed like such a nice young lady. We don't deserve to be treated like that. I don't care if it's in a teaching or whatever job that you're in. You don't deserve to be treated like that. Another one, probably in her 30s, that had taught for several years, and she gave it up, middle school, mainly the same thing. She said the cell phones, caused so many problems, and I got a lot of that when I was subbing in the middle school. If you say something to these kids, like she said she had tried to take a cell phone from a kid one day, and they said, my mama says you cannot take my cell phone away from me. Or they'll call their mother and say, the teacher is said such and such to me, and then the mother will call the school, or they'll come in and cause you a bunch of problems. Everything, it seems like, is against the teachers. And that's probably not just in teaching, but it's in a lot of things. But I'm just saying how sad that our world is. But this is my prediction. And so when I'm gone, if you're still around, you look and see if this happens to be true. I predict that in the future, all education will be online and the kids will be staying home. I think they will eventually get away from the schools because it's getting, nobody, the principal, nobody has any power for discipline or behavior problems. And that's what the biggest thing going on in our schools today. And I just think that, and I'm not sure, I mean, I don't know any details. This is just what I dreamed up because the discipline was pretty bad whenever I left there. So, and then you're looking, it's down here in these elementary schools. But I think so much of the problems are that the kids can't read or they can't write a decent sentence. And I think I've talked about that before, and I'm not going to talk about it again, and I don't know what the answer to that is. And if our kids are not getting educated, what does the future hold? It used to be, just a few of them were slow in the classroom. But if you did a survey now, I think you would be amazed at how many kids cannot read, even at the middle school level, even at the high school level. Sad situation. So I'm just glad that I'm out of it. I'm glad that my girl is getting ready to graduate, even though, I have a lot of bittersweet feelings over that with her going to college and leaving home and all, but it's a sad situation. And I don't know if in the future they will require kids to go to school. I don't know. But I just can see that all the teaching will be done remotely. Now, I have a great niece, and she's not teaching remotely because of the discipline, but her job was about 40 miles away, and then she had a child, and then she didn't go back actually into the classroom, but she teaches remotely at home, and that works out very well for her. She works like a half a day. To kids like in Virginia, or I didn't even know it was locally in the States you could do that. And then one of these ladies that I watched this morning that taught the middle school, her voice, if you could have heard her voice talking, about how just hopeless case. She was just down about all this, about quitting school. Because, the benefits in our day-to-day, we got to have medical insurance. All right, now she's teaching remotely. She was just like a different person. Just the way she presented herself and the way she felt from teaching online instead of in the schools. It's a sad situation, but I just felt like I need to throw that out there. So if you have access to children in any way, let's teach them some good morals of, do unto others, and see if, I think the bad ones are about outweighing the good ones. But anyway, I've got another little funny story I want to read to you. Now, some of you really enjoyed that little story I read to you the other day, and I hope some of you men learned a lesson or two from it. And I told one of my little friends, her husband's wanting to retire early, and I told her she better have him listen to that so he wouldn't get any ideas if he retired early to start kind of bossing her around. She might not like that. But I thought this one was funny, so let's listen to this. A young guy from Texas moved to California and goes to a big department store looking for a job. The manager says, "Do you have any sales experience?" The kid says, "Yes, I was a salesman back home in Texas." Well, the boss liked the kid, so he gave him the job. "You start tomorrow. I'll come down after we close and see how you did." His first day on the job was rough, but he got through it. After the store was locked up, the boss came down. "How many sales did you make today?" The kid said, "One." The boss said, just one? Our salespeople average 20 or 30 sales a day. How much was the sale for? The kid said, $101,237.64. The boss says, $101,237.64? What did you sell him? The kid said, well, first I sold him a small fish hook. Then I sold him a medium fish hook. Then I sold him a larger fish hook. Then I sold him a new fishing rod. Then I asked him where he was going fishing, and he said, down at the coast. So I told him he was going to need a boat. So we went down to the boat department, and I sold him that twin-engine Chris Craft. Then he said he didn't think his Honda Civic would pull it, so I took him down to the automotive department and sold him that 4x4 Blazer. The boss said, a guy came in here to buy a fish hook, and you sold him a boat and a truck? The kid said, no, he came in here to buy a box of tampons for his wife, and I said, well, since your weekend's shot, you might as well go fishing. I hope you got a little chuckle out of that. And I hope you have a good day, and we'll just talk again soon, okay? Bye-bye.